In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the rear wheel bearing and hub assembly on this Jeep Compass. Let's get started. Use a 19mm socket, remove all 5 of your lug nuts, and then remove the wheel. If your wheel is stuck, put on a lug nut for safety, tap the tire, not the wheel, from the backside, break it free, and remove it. Now we have to remove this cover, which for me is just a ball of rust basically. There's also a cotter pin going through. I'm not going to try to save any of this. This is way too far gone, but we have to pry this off. For me it's just literally going to break off, which that's fine. I'd rather this than have to fight it, and then we'll deal with the axle nut in a second. For now, this cover for you should slide off once you pull off the cotter pin. You should be able to take this off of here. I'm going to try to get some of this cotter pin off, at least break it off flush so that the axle nut can come over it. It's broken flush. Let's get a socket, remove the axle. Use a 32mm socket and remove the axle nut. Behind here, there's a washer. We're going to have to remove that. Now we have to make sure the axle pushes through. Hopefully yours is not as rusty and you can just take a rubber mallet or a punch and a hammer and drive it through. Mine is extra stuck, so I'm going to put an air chisel right in the middle of it and push it through. There we go, that moved. Now there are 2 T55 Torx bolts here and up here that you have to remove in order to get the caliper bracket off of the knuckle. So loosen those up and remove them. Before I remove this one all the way, I'm going to break free the bottom one. That way the caliper is still mounted securely. It's going to be easier to do that. There we go. Remove this bolt and the top one. This top one removed, you should be able to remove the caliper and bracket off of the rotor. Set it up on here. Now remove your rotor. If it doesn't come off, it's either stuck on the shoe, so you need to go through this hole and de-adjust them, compress them down a little bit, or it's probably stuck on the hub, in which case you'd want to hammer it between the lug studs. Don't hit the lug studs, but that should break it free. From the back side, we now have to remove the ABS sensor. Ours is in extremely poor condition here, so, well, not the sensor itself, but the bearing, which is why we're replacing this. Basically, just pull straight up on it. And I'm going to pull it out and through its hole here just so I can get more slack out of it and push it out of the way. I do not want this in the way of me working on the bearing. The sensor is good still, so I'm trying to save it, of course. You don't want to accidentally hit it with anything. Now there are 4 17mm headed bolts that hold this wheel bearing on from the back side. Let's remove all 4 and then we'll hammer the wheel bearing out. Okay, all 4 are out. Now from the front, take a hammer, hit the bearing. It's probably going to take the whole backing shield or backing plate with the e-brake shoes off with it. That's okay. We'll deal with it if that happens. Hopefully though, the wheel bearing pops out of the knuckle assembly here and leaves this attached. Unlikely, but we'll give it a shot. Once again, take a hammer and hit this. Try to avoid hammering the e-brake shoes. If you hit them once or twice, just make sure there's no damage. At this point, the whole thing came off with it, just like I expected. I'm going to take my rubber mallet, finish tapping the axle through. That way we can pull this whole thing off of here. This is the back side of the wheel bearing. I'm going to get this off. And now I have to hammer the wheel bearing down through this backing plate. So this is basically where it was stuck, and we have to send it through. It will come out with these attached, like everything here can stay. We just have to hammer it from the back side. Now, hammer this out. There it goes. Now we have to do a little bit of cleaning. I'm not going to take a very abrasive sanding disc, just a light one to basically remove all the surface rust that's here, all this buildup. I want the new wheel bearing to sit flush. I'm also going to clean up the splines of the axle. Not that there's anything wrong with them, just going to get all this debris off of here. And then inside this ring here, as well as on the back side of where this mounts, I'm going to put a wire wheel inside that hole. Just get everything nice and clean. We'll coat it with an anti-corrosive coating and then continue. rinse it all off with brake parts cleaner. Apply a thin coating of anti-seize onto this surface so that it can prevent this from corroding in the future. Also, it's not going to seize up next time, hopefully, if you go to take this all apart for whatever reason. And especially on this inner ring here, this is where it's actually going to get stuck, which is why we fought it for so long, here and on the backing shield. This would be the knuckle side. You don't need a lot. Just a thin layer will do the job. If you put too much, it's just going to squeeze out when you clamp it all together. There we go. I'm also going to put some on the splines of the axle since I'm here. That way when it goes in through the wheel hub, it won't seize up like this one was. It's going to slide right out next time it has to be serviced. Apply a thin layer here too, especially on this inner ring here in the hole. This is the most important part. Like I said, this is where it'll seize up, and just a thin layer on the outside for some rust prevention. Grab your parts, put everything back together, make sure that wheel bearing goes through the backside. There we go. Get that seated, and now put the axle through it. There we go. Now I know the bolt holes aren't lined up. That's okay. Now if the bolt holes don't line up, just spin this around until they do. Let's go on the back side and thread in some of the bolts. Okay, now from the back side, try to start in some of the bolts. That one is started. Once again, twist things around as needed to get these bolts started in smoothly. Everything is starting in smoothly, so that's great. For these, I'm going to try to drive them in with the socket. I'm not worried about bottoming them out or anything. I just want to get the threads started. All right, let's snug these up. I'm going to snug these up in a cross pattern. That way the wheel bearing and everything can seat properly. There we go. Not worried about tightening them a lot. I will come back to torque all of these. .77 foot-pounds is a torque for all four of these. At this point, I'm not worried about going in a cross pattern since I already snugged them in a cross pattern. So I'm just going to torque them down. That's one. And two. Let's reinstall the ABS sensor. Make sure you put it through its hole here if you took it out. And then slide it into that mounting clip that it's supposed to secure into. There we go, that's installed. Add some anti-seize to the hub. You just need a thin layer, not too much. You don't want it to squeeze out and get on your rotor. Cover the whole surface and focus on this inner ring here. Actually, there are two. One for the wheel, which is this one, the outer one, and then one where the rotor sits, which is the inner one. I'm going to coat both. That way neither items seize up. And then, of course, the face of the hub, where the rotor sits. Okay, there we go. The rotor needs to be clean on the inside. If this area is very rusty or not even, sand it down, make it nice and flat. This one's in great shape, so I'm going to reinstall it, put it right over the hub. If it doesn't seat right away, it's most likely because the e-brake shoes are at an angle. So I'm just going to tap them. There we go. That goes on a lot better. We didn't mess with the adjustment of the e-brake shoes, so they should still be perfectly adjusted. Grab your caliper, slide it over the rotor, and line it up with the 2 bolt holes. Put the 2 bolts in. With both of them started, let's bottom them out. .52 foot-pounds is the torque for both of these bolts. There we go. Let's get the axle nut on. I'm going to put on the washer first. I'm reusing the old washer. It's still in decent condition. Put on the new axle nut, use your 32mm socket and bottom it out. Once it's bottomed out, let's torque it to 181 foot-pounds. I'm holding the hub from spinning with a pry bar and, once again, 181 foot-pounds. That's it right there. Make sure the castle nut slot lines up if this is the type axle nut you have. Mine has to go just a little bit further to line up. Right there is perfect. Grab a new cotter pin, stick it through, and bend it over to lock it in. There we go. Put the wheel back on. Start on all 5 of your lug nuts, bottom them out in a cross pattern, and then also in a cross pattern, torque them to 100 foot-pounds. Again, 100 foot-pounds in a cross pattern. Double check them if you want. There you have it. Take it for a road test.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.